from Bob Burton, who says, I'm sure you've heard performances by other conductors of almost every piece you conduct. How do you decide how you will conduct the piece? Do you model your performance after other performances you've liked? Or do you simply study the score and do what you think the composer intended? Well, Bob, that's a good question. And it's something that all performers, I think, deal with one way or another, particularly in the modern era where there is a plethora of interpretations of all aspects of the repertoire from multiple sources. For me, it's probably a combination of a number of things. Yes, I do listen to the occasional performance, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or my CD collection, whatever. But it also depends on the work. There are certain pieces that I don't think I necessarily need to get exposed to by listening to 12 different recordings. Beethoven 5, for instance, I kind of know how the tunes go, and I've got it enough in my head that when I come back to reinterpret the piece, I've trained myself to answer a lot of questions and to challenge my previous assumptions with the piece. And when you're conducting a piece for the first time, if it's a premiere, well, you certainly don't have any prior history of other people's performances to go back on. But you, on the other hand, you do have what you might term as excellent primary source material, and that's the living composer. It's always a good interlocutor for me to go to the composer and ask her or him, so what exactly did you mean by this dynamic or this articulation mark? I guess I'd throw that at Jeremy and say to you, if you're looking at a piece of chamber music or if it's a concerto that you're going to be preparing, do you go to other sources? Are you kind of just straight ahead with the score and the parts, or how does that work for you?
I do try and listen to many different recordings. It actually started, well, that whole process was actually what got me into playing the violin. I heard David Oistrakh playing Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto when I was 6 years old, and I wanted to make a sound like that. As we go on, we use it as initially as a cheat, as a crutch to getting it in our ears. Then it evolves, especially when we're starting to do orchestral repertoire, where we need to know what the composers and the pieces are about. We need to get used to sending our ears to where they need to go. And it also helps when you listen, especially to historic recordings and then more modern ones, it helps to define where the boundaries are of an this interpretation is sort of over here, this interpretation is kind of over here. And especially when you're preparing for auditions, it's important to know where the middle of the road is. Because if you come in and play something using it as a platform for your own interpretation, it's not going to work. People want to know, do you know where the boundaries are? So it's a mixture of things. When you're, as you said, when you're doing new pieces, I have a slight advantage being an orchestral musician where it's up to the conductor how they want to interpret it, what the tempi are. I mean, I would ask a follow-up of you. There are trends in terms of tempi, especially Beethoven, things like that, period instruments. How do you choose which direction you want to go, which avenue you want to pursue?
I find as I'm getting older, I'm shamelessly pilfering from what would be called the historically informed practice approach, not just now for Baroque music, but classical and through Beethoven at least as well. And so my concept of tempos have certainly changed over the years. I think there's a traditional sense that conductors, as they get older, get more self-indulgent and slower, to impart their wisdom in a very measured and deep way, because slower means deeper, right? Not so much, perhaps. So I've noticed that with Beethoven, my tempos are definitely getting faster as I get older. Hopefully manageable, but just also I think it's nice to live on the edge and just push the envelope, because I think that's part of, we're talking principally about Beethoven here, but part of what makes Beethoven is the pushing of the boundaries, the sense of restlessness, of romantic yearning. All of these start to point toward extremes, and no matter where you stand on whether, I'll give you a clear example, no matter where you stand on the question of whether metronome marks are valid or not, I would submit that if you're doing the second movement of the Seventh Symphony, and you do it at a tempo like is bum 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 bee bum bum bum, which is by no means in the broadest scheme of things that unusual a tempo. If you would look at that 60 years ago, absolutely. But it's hard to imagine that tempo lining up with the word allegretto. You can say it does a lot of things. You can say it imparts a certain degree of seriousness and somberness. But if you were to ask, does that sound like an allegretto, a small allegro to you? The question is, it was pretty straightforwardly answered from me. That said, again, with Beethoven, there are some fascinating examples of metronome marks that seem off the edge to me. And I'm sure as a quartet player, you've come across those in the quartet repertoire, particularly with the late quartets. Is that true?
Well, 59 number 3, the fugue, goes like blazes, and it's very, very technically challenging. With the late Beethovens, they are such a universe unto themselves. I guess the boundaries of tempi in the Beethoven quartets are, I think, because it's a smaller, more intimate group, the group winds up deciding what's workable both interpretively and technically and for getting it together. Whereas with a symphony, with a single interpretive source, the conductor, they get to be the autocrat, the benign, hopefully, dictator of what we're going for. And invariably, what you find is that conductors accommodate they find the middle ground between what they want and what the orchestra is able to do. And so knowing that you want not so much a specific tempo, but an on the edge tempo, that tempo will be slightly different with different orchestras. But it will still have the same energy because they will be on the edge of their abilities.
Go ahead.
When you hear somebody like Heifetz, and you're a listener, not a violinist, you hear them and you go, oh boy, that's exciting, but flawless. And invariably, some rube is going to say, well, that doesn't sound very hard. And then you try it and you realize he is going supersonically fast and is so good, it just trips off of his fingers and sounds like nothing at all. Whereas any lesser mere mortal tries it at that tempo and it will fall apart in a scrap after 3 bars.
Yeah, I think it also goes to something that we're conscious of in the orchestra, and you and I have spoken, I think, on a number of times over the years, is that uh, ensemble is absolutely key in perception, and by which I mean if something can sound really fast if it's together, but better that it not go too fast and start to fall apart of the seams. If you play something at a slightly more measured tempo and the ensemble is absolutely impeccable, then it will give perhaps an illusion of being actually at a faster tempo.
Yeah, absolutely. Although, when things fall apart, sounds pretty fast.
Well, that just goes for a slightly different impression. It's a memorable one. The last thing I want to be is boring. Crash and burn in style. That's my motto.
That's right.
Listen, it's so much fun for us to have the chance to chat, and maybe we can do this again at some point, but I think this would be a good point to wrap it up today. I just want to thank you so much for the conversation and for everything that you have brought to my music making now over the course of 30-something years since we started making, sorry to date us here, but we first started our musical collaborations in San Francisco when I came as assistant conductor in 1989, and then they continued in Sun Valley, which I think you probably joined in maybe 1997 or so, and
something
then
like that.
One in Marin. So I figure we've burned a lot of rubber on the roads together, and I look forward to many more years of that.
It's been a great pleasure talking with you now, visiting with you, working with you over the years. It's been an absolute joy, and I can't wait for us to get back together live on stage making music for our Marin Symphony audiences.
Truer words have never been spoken. Let's look forward to that day. Whenever it comes, it's going to be a very, very special time. But in the meantime, please stay well, and thank you again for all the wonderful music.